I think I'm recording, right? Redphotographers.com, Peter here, guys. How are you doing? Today I'm going to talk about basics of photography, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, which is the exposure triangle. Each one is going to affect other, and when you change one, another needs to be compensated. First of all, let's just start with the importance of aperture. What is aperture? Well, I have a lens right here, and that thing that is opening up and closing is aperture. There's a series of blades. The more the number of those blades are, the more beautiful bokeh in your background you're gonna get, and your lens is gonna be sharper. F-stop aperture or iris is the named peaked for this little thing right here. If you want to reveal your background, you need to have a little hole. If you open it up, the background is gonna be blurry. Don't get confused by why my f-stop is 1.2 and I don't know which one should I use. 1.2 is gonna make the background blurry or my subject blurry. Just think about it. When you have your aperture wide open, this hole wide open, your subject is gonna be completely separated from the background. So if you want that shallow depth of field, you can use the wide aperture, which is 1.2, 1.4, 1.8. Another thing that can drastically changes the depth of field is the focal length compression of your lens. So if you're using the 70 to 200 millimeter, for example, any brand, when you zoom to 200 and you use the focal length of 200, you're gonna get shallow depth of field. Imagine your f-stop is 1.8, your f-stop is 2.8. It's gonna multiply and give you more bokeh or buttery background, which is very trendy nowadays. But what is this fucking depth of field? Field is whatever you see with your eyes or with the viewfinder of your camera. That is field. The field has foreground, midground, and background. And it has a depth. If you want to manipulate it, one of the ways to do it is with your f-stop of your lens. F-stop also is going to change the exposure. So the narrower this hole is, or you're going to f22, you're going to get less light. And when it's wide open, obviously you're gonna have more light hitting the sensor behind the lens. F-stop also affects the sharpness of your image. Meaning, when you use any kind of lens, you need to find the sweet spot of it. It is usually 3 or 4 stop after the first stop, which is, we call it wide open. So when you stop down your lens to, let's say your lens start from 1.4, when you stop it down, 3 or 4 stop after 1.4 is going to be 1.8, 2, 2.8, and 3.5. So 3.5 will be, or 4 will be your sweet spot. You need to, examine this and see which one is the sharpest or sweet spot of your lens at that f-stop that you're using. Another thing, my friend, is the blades. Those blades that they form the aperture. The more the number of those blades are, the more beautiful and round bokeh you will get at the back, and your lens will be sharper. Meaning, if you're buying any lens, when you go through the specs, you have like 12, you have maybe 14 elements, and then you have 8 blades, 12 blades. If the number is higher than this, you're gonna have a very quality lens. The wider the aperture is, the more expensive your lens become. Alright, let me not to bother you with this fucking f-stop. You're gonna practice it, see what is this guy. After that, you have shutter speed. Shutter speed, can be mechanical, can be electronical nowadays. Let's talk about the mechanical shutter speed in terms of understanding what is this shutter. Shutter, it shuts the sensor. First is the lens, first is the lens, then is the shutter, then is your sensor. So, not only aperture but also shutter is going to manipulate the exposure. I mean, you can change the exposure with your shutter speed. Shutter speed is a fraction of a second. Usually we say 1 to 1, which is 1 second. Half of the second, a quarter of a second. This is the way that we try to understand and call the shutter. Shutter speed opens and closes. So it has two motion. In flash photography, we call it first curtain and second curtain, or front or rear curtain of shutter. It starts from the speed of 30 seconds all the way up to 8,000 or 10,000th of the second. So imagine when we talk about 1 to 80th of a second, it means we divide 1 second to 80 pieces, and the shutter is gonna open and close in just one little fraction of the second. The faster the shutter speed is, it is gonna freeze the moment. In sports photography, you're gonna use higher shutter speed. When you are gonna boost your shutter to 1 to 5,000 of a second, you are gonna lose a lot of light. What you're gonna do? You're gonna open up the aperture to compensate that underexposing caused by the shutter. You're gonna get very creative with shutter speed, especially when you use flash. You can use high-speed sync, you can do motion blur effect, you can do shutter drag, you can do light painting. Shutter speed is very important when it comes to exposure triangle. The last thing is ISO. ISO, I have not much to say about it. The only thing you need to know is the sensitivity of your sensor. Nowadays, in the help of this great technology from Japan or from other countries, other brands, you have a very practical ISO number. In the olden days, when you wanted to go for film photography, you had to go to the lab and buy a roll of film, and you had to choose your ISO according to the photography genre that you want to do. So if you wanted to do night photography, you're supposed to use higher shutter speed. Why? Because the lower the shutter speed is, like 100 or 50 or native ISO number of any camera, which is the lowest, it means you have less sensitivity. The less sensitivity you have, the camera has less understanding of light. When you want to take advantage of ISO, when you're in controlled environment like studio, you can lower it down, okay? But if you are doing wedding photography, I always leave my ISO in auto. Otherwise, I want to get a very fashion portraiture of the bride, and it's not sensitive at all. So you need tons of light, but you will get very clean and sharp without any noise. But if you boost your ISO according to the brand that you're using to 2,000, 3,000, or some brands even 12,000 ISO, you're not gonna get any noise. After that, you will get noise. Noise is not bad. Many people hate it. Many photographers like me, I love noise. I try to avoid it, but depends on the story that you want to tell in your photo. You can actually use ISO. When you're doing night photography, you can take advantage of ISO. Sony has very good reputation in this case. Canon is good, Fuji is good because the sensors are from Sony. By the way, try to practice these three and understand the interconnectivity between these three: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. This is what we call it exposure triangle. This is what you need to master in order to become a photographer and make money out of it. Don't forget, you're gonna make money out of your photography. You're not gonna be a free photographer, otherwise you're gonna leave your camera and all of your equipment one day in the storage. If you have any question, drop it down there. I'm gonna reach out to you. Love you. See you next time. Red Photographers, Peter here, guys. Bye bye.